to pen and perspective, where the story always knows more than it's telling. Every word is intentional. Every silence holds a truth. Now, part two is about the attention that doesn't announce itself. Because once the story leaves the screen, the real consequences start showing up. Let's get into part two. By the end of part one, I wasn't guessing anymore. I'd seen the pattern, I'd confirmed the timing, and I knew that whatever this was, it wasn't isolated. Part two is where things stop being theoretical. I didn't accuse anyone, because once you recognize a system, you have to decide what you're willing to do with that knowledge. I didn't drag the church. I just told the truth carefully and watched faith leaders scramble to protect the institution instead of the people. Power doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it shows up in places people think are sacred. The story that week wasn't supposed to be explosive. It wasn't even supposed to be controversial. On paper, it looked like a routine deep dive into a large faith-based organization with national reach. Big conferences, big donations, big language about service, healing, and impact. The kind of organization people defend without reading. What caught my attention wasn't scandal. It was silence. Money moving through shell nonprofits. Outreach budgets that didn't quite add up. Communities named in press releases that never appeared in audited reports. Everything technically legal. Everything morally slippery. That's usually where people lose me. They want blood. They want names. They want a villain they can point to and feel righteous about. I wanted accuracy. So I slowed down. I read filings instead of tweets, compared dates, followed money trails that curved just enough to stay inside the lines. I talked to people who had signed NDAs and didn't want their names anywhere near a headline. I rewrote the piece 3 times, cutting language that felt sharp but unnecessary. If I was going to say it, it had to be clean. The first sign something was different came before I published. Not online. Offline. I noticed the car first, dark, generic, parked across the street from my place when I left for coffee, gone when I came back, then there again later that afternoon, idling near the corner like it belonged there. Could have been nothing. I'm not dramatic. I don't build stories out of vibes, but I pay attention. The DMs came like they always do. Church people angry, church people grateful, church people asking me to pray, church people telling me I was going to hell. Normal. What wasn't normal was the email asking for clarification that didn't mention the article at all. No quotes, no corrections, just questions about my background, my education, who I worked with, who funded me. That's not curiosity, that's inventory. I didn't respond. I double-checked everything one more time and published. It didn't blow up the way scandals usually do. It didn't trend with hashtags or get stitched into outrage. It moved quieter than that, shared in boardrooms first, forwarded by executive assistants with no commentary attached, opened in meetings that weren't supposed to be about it, the kind of rooms where people don't raise their voices, but their jaws tighten. Then it hit the pastors, not the internet pastors, the ones with bylaws, the ones who don't tweet their opinions but control budgets and pulpits and conference invitations. Some were furious, not because the reporting was wrong, because it was careful. That was the problem. You can fight gossip. You can dismiss rumor. You can shout down speculation. You can't easily discredit restraint. A few tried. One senior leader released a video response within hours, sitting behind a polished desk, Bible open but untouched. He didn't name me. He didn't refute the numbers. He talked about discernment, about outsiders misunderstanding kingdom work, about how context matters. I watched the whole thing once. Then I posted a single follow-up. Not a clapback, not a rant, just a screenshot of his organization's own filing with the exact line he'd skipped highlighted. No commentary, no tone. Receipts don't need emotion. That's when people started trusting me in real time. Not the loud ones, the quiet watchers. The folks who hadn't shared the story but were reading everything. Church administrators started emailing from personal accounts. Former staff members asked how to submit documents anonymously. A lawyer I'd never met sent one sentence from a Proton mail address. "You're being precise. Keep going." That's when the car came back. Same black sedan, different street. I noticed it 2 days in a row. Parked far enough not to look intentional. Gone before I could stare too long. I didn't panic. I didn't post about it. I took another picture and filed it next to the first. Pressure like that isn't meant to scare you into silence. It's meant to see if you'll get sloppy. I didn't. By the time the story finished its cycle, the institution did what institutions always do: a couple resignations, quietly worded, a statement about internal review, a promise of reform that didn't name a single person who actually caused the harm. Enough accountability to calm the public, not enough to satisfy anyone who was paying attention. I didn't push for more, not because I couldn't, but because I knew what pushing would cost and who it would protect in the end. People like to believe stories end when they go viral. They don't. They end when power decides it's done talking. The following stopped after that. No more cruisers slowing near my block. No more questions dressed up as concern. That's usually how you know you brushed against something real. I never learned the officers' names, never wrote about them, but I did get a picture. Two men, plain clothes. I saved it where I keep things I don't plan to use, but refuse to forget. Because I don't collect leverage for sport, I collect it for survival. When the dust settled, people thanked me. Faith leaders, community members, even a few critics who'd been loud at first. What they didn't know was that the story hadn't scared me. It had sharpened me. It reminded me that truth doesn't just upset liars, it unsettles systems, and systems don't always fight back with fists or threats. Sometimes they just watch, measure, wait. I closed my laptop that night with more respect than I'd started with, for the work, for the risk, and for the quiet understanding that whatever came next wouldn't announce itself either. It never does. The week after that moved strangely. Not quieter, just heavier. My days went back to their usual rhythm: coffee, screens, notes, emails that needed answering and ones that didn't. People assume virality changes your life overnight, but most of the time it just sharpens everything that was already there. I took the meetings because I needed to know what kind of attention this was. Most of them were dressed up as relationship building. That's always the first lie. They weren't there to offer me a job. They were there to offer access, on conditions. One group wanted advance notice before I posted anything that touched their space. Another wanted a standing fact check window, which was really just a delay tactic with better branding. One asked if I'd be open to consulting behind the scenes, helping them understand how stories land before they ever reach the public. Different language, same ask. Help us manage exposure. Nobody said it like that, but everyone meant it. The power wasn't in what they were offering. It was in what they wanted me to stop doing. Then there was the meeting that didn't fit. No boardroom, no legal framing, no talk of slowing things down. They told me they'd been watching my work for over a year, not just the virality, but the restraint, how I documented without editorializing, how I separated facts from opinion even when the internet wanted blood. They didn't ask me to soften anything. They asked if I'd ever considered building something bigger than a feed, a small studio, neutral ground, a space where stories could live longer than 24 hours. where I could host conversations without losing ownership of my work. No exclusivity, no editorial control, just infrastructure. They didn't pitch it as a deal, they framed it as an option. You don't have to answer now, they said. We just wanted you to know the door exists. That was the meeting that sat in my chest. Not because I wanted it, but because it came without strings. And in my experience, clean offers are rarer than corrupt ones. By the time I left, I understood what that week had really been about. Everyone else wanted to contain me. That one wanted to position me, and I wasn't ready to decide what was more dangerous. Final update. I met Kiara at Grits and Waffles, late enough that brunch had thinned out, but early enough that the kitchen still smelled like butter, syrup, and something fried exactly right. I got there early, I usually do. Same table by the window, back to the wall. Coffee and water already ordered before I even finished sliding into the seat. Not because I'm nervous, because I like to see what's coming and who's behind me at the same time. When Kiara walked in, I clocked her shoulders before I saw her face. Tight, alert. That told me everything I needed to know before she even sat down. About time, I said, smiling. She laughed as she dropped into the chair across from me. Please, I was circling for parking like my life depended on it. We hugged, easy, familiar. The kind of hug that doesn't need recalibration. We talk all the time. Maybe not every day, but enough that silence never feels like distance. Menus stayed flat on the table. You already know what you want, she said. Same thing I always get, I told her. And don't let them talk you into nothing different. She smiled. Wouldn't dare. We ordered, quick, automatic. We talked about people we know, updates, not introductions. A friend who moved to Atlanta and came back with a podcast, a new accent, and a whole lot of opinions she didn't have before. Somebody else quietly divorcing after years of swearing they were solid. I mentioned a comment thread that went left for no reason at all. Kiara rolled her eyes like she'd already seen it. Normal, familiar, comfortable. Then I leaned back, fork resting against my plate, and asked it like it wasn't the question I'd been holding the whole time. How's Sandra? Kiara paused. Not long, just long enough. She's holding it together, she said. As much as she can. I nodded. Let that land. And Walter? I asked. She didn't dodge it. You've been watching. Of course, I said. Everybody has. I just haven't said much. That tracks, she replied. Our food came then. Steam rose between us, filling the space where lighter conversation had been. I took a few bites. Let the room settle. I've learned not to rush people when they're circling something heavy. I'm not here to tell you about the case, Kiara said quietly. I know you already know the basics. I looked up. Okay. There are things that never sat right with me, she continued, and the more I sat with it, the more connected it all started to feel. I didn't interrupt. That's not my style. Sandra called me one night, she said somebody warned her not to trust everyone in her friend group. It shook her. Something tightened in my chest. I kept my face neutral. Then Brian got jumped, she went on. Not robbed, just hurt enough to send a message. I exhaled slowly. And Reggie's shop, she added. Torn apart, cash still there, clippers untouched. That wasn't about money. No, I said. I remembered the photos. Looked at them longer than most people probably had. That was about fear, she nodded. Exactly. She leaned forward then. I'm not saying any one thing proves anything, but when you line it up, Sandra's call, Brian, Reggie, It stops feeling isolated. I leaned back, eyes drifting to the window. People passed by outside, laughing, scrolling, living like nothing underneath them was shifting. I had that feeling too, I said. Not facts, just pressure, like something breathing close enough to remind you it's there. Kiara watched me carefully. You been dealing with that? More than once, I said. Questions framed like concern, requests that sound neutral but aren't. I didn't say more. I didn't need to. I'm not asking you to do anything, she said. I just needed you to know what I know, and I needed to know if it landed the same way with you. It does, I told her. The air shifted then. Not heavy, just charged. The kind of shift you feel when two people realize they've been standing on the same fault line from opposite sides. I already clocked that this wasn't just about Walter, I said. I just didn't have enough to name it yet. We finished eating after that, conversation drifting back toward safer ground. But neither of us fully returned. Some information doesn't sit quietly once it's been spoken out loud. Outside, we lingered longer than usual. Let's check back in, she said. Soon. Yeah, I said. We should. We hugged again, tighter this time. I stayed where I was for a moment after she walked away, watching the city move like nothing had changed. Some stories don't announce themselves. They wait. After lunch, I didn't go straight home. I walked. Not because I needed air, but because I needed space between what I knew and what I was tempted to do with it. DTLA was loud in that familiar way. Cars too close, conversations half finished, people moving like everything in their lives made sense. I let it pass through me instead of pulling me into it. I didn't replay Kiara's words exactly. I never do. What stuck wasn't the details, it was the alignment. Sandra's phone call, Brian getting hurt, Reggie's shop getting hit. Different situations, same pressure, same quiet warning that never came with a name attached. None of it was proof, nor was it publishable. Hell, it wasn't even a story yet. But it was familiar. I'd learned a long time ago that truth doesn't show up all at once. It shows up as patterns, as that same tight feeling in your chest, showing up in different rooms with different faces. And that feeling was back. When I got home, I put my keys down where I always do, kicked my shoes off, set my phone face down on the counter, not because I wanted to ignore it, but because I didn't want it deciding my next move for me. This was the pause. The ethical one. I could already hear how people would talk if I moved too fast. I could hear it just as clearly if I didn't move at all. Too cautious, too scared, complicit, protecting somebody. I've never been interested in feeding outrage. I care about accuracy. So I opened my laptop, a private folder, names, dates, loose threads, the kind of groundwork you lay before you ever decide to speak. Brian, Reggie, Sandra's call. If I speak, I want it to land. If I move, I want it clean. If I wait, I want the wait to matter. Later that night, I sat alone and opened my notes. Old screenshots, half-formed thoughts, things I'd saved and told myself I'd come back to when I had more time, more clarity, more distance. I landed on Walter, on the timeline I'd built for myself. Dates, charges, transfers, the gaps nobody ever explains out loud. I reread one detail I'd skimmed over before, just a line that had always felt slightly off, like a sentence that didn't belong in its paragraph. It hit different now. I'd learned enough. I leaned back and closed my eyes for a second, letting the feeling settle instead of pushing it away. That low, steady pressure in my chest, the one that doesn't scream, the one that waits. This wasn't curiosity anymore. It was alignment. The pieces Kiara mentioned. The way people moved around the truth instead of through it. the silence that followed certain questions, the patterns that didn't look like accidents once you stopped giving them grace. I didn't feel scared. That surprised me. What I felt was clear. I didn't have a story yet. What I had was clarity, and that's always the first responsibility. This is where the listening ends and the work begins.
Epilogue. Detective Strauss had built his career in the margins of law enforcement, not in the arrests or the headlines, but in the invisible mechanics that decided outcomes long before a case ever reached a courtroom. He broke rules quietly, evidence misplaced just long enough to become inadmissible, a witness interview lost during a system migration, a patrol car conveniently delayed when a knock came too early, a file routed to the wrong desk until the statute of limitations did the rest. He once buried a body cam clip by re-exporting it at a lower frame rate, just enough corruption to make it unreliable. Another time, he coached a junior detective through a report rewrite that shifted intent into ambiguity. Clean hands, dirty results. No one ever thanked him out loud that they didn't have to. The network didn't operate on orders, it operated on alignment. Strauss wasn't at the top. He wasn't even close. He sat where law enforcement brushed up against community power. Organizers with donor lists, boards with legal teams, institutions that spoke the language of reform while protecting their own infrastructure. And they didn't tell him who to target, they told him where to look. Today he got the message in a hallway, the kind that existed between public and private. After a community safety forum, after the cameras were off, after handshakes had softened into familiarity. The kind of place where people who weren't cops still spoke with authority, and cops like Strauss listened. Someone stepped close enough that no one else could hear. "She's been asking around." Strauss didn't react. He never did on the first sentence. A phone appeared briefly between them, no handoff, just a tilt of the screen, a paused video, a familiar face, a laugh he'd heard before. Kendall. Kendall wasn't a new name to Strauss. She hadn't been for a while. The first time she crossed his radar was the Trenet story, back when it stopped being a messy internet situation and started showing up in filings, continuances, and sealed motions, when screenshots became exhibits, when timelines mattered, when people who thought they were just being loud online realized they were being read into the record. Strauss remembered that shift clearly. Most viral stories burned hot and fast. They ruined reputations, rattled households, then disappeared before anyone in a suit had to touch them. This one didn't. This one followed the paper trail all the way into a courtroom. That was what caught his attention. Not the scandal itself, he'd seen worse, but the way it had been handled, the way the noise got stripped down into something usable, credible, hard to dismiss, the way Kendall didn't editorialize herself into the center of it, didn't posture, didn't try to play hero. She just laid it out. Receipts clean enough that attorneys didn't have to work around them. Language careful enough that nobody could claim bias. Timing sharp enough that denials sounded rehearsed by the time they arrived. Strauss had flagged her then, not formally, not on paper, just mentally. People like her didn't come around often. The ones who knew how to move information from the public sphere into real consequence without looking like they were trying to burn the house down. He'd followed her work since. Community stories, institutional failures, moments where power expected silence and got scrutiny instead. She never stayed in one lane long enough to be predictable, but she was consistent in one way. When she spoke, things shifted. So when her name came up, Strauss wasn't surprised. If anything, he'd been expecting it. This was the point in the cycle where someone like Kendall always reappeared, right when a situation started to feel airtight, right when people got careless. Strauss didn't lean forward, didn't interrupt or ask questions. Strauss nodded once, slow, the way you acknowledge receipt without agreeing to anything. As the man walked away, Strauss remembered the Treen story, the way Kendall spoke like someone who expected the truth to hold under pressure. And that was her problem. Her name wasn't on any list, not officially, but her work had started showing up in the wrong places. That was how you knew someone had crossed a boundary, not by what they published, by who started getting nervous. Strauss got into his car and sat there for a moment, hands resting on the wheel. He didn't need to make contact yet. Pressure wasn't something you applied immediately. Pressure was something you designed. Strauss understood that kind of power intimately. He'd watched it work on people who never realized the decision had been made about them weeks earlier. Kendall hadn't felt any of that, which meant she still thought she was moving freely. That was fine. He pulled into traffic, not thinking about stopping her, just noting where the leverage would live if it ever became necessary. Strauss smiled faintly. The network didn't rush people like her. They waited to see what she touched. That's where I'll leave it for now. Not with answers or accusations, but with the moment right before a decision hardens into direction. In part 2, I'll walk you through what happened after this pause. What surfaced once the thread stopped feeling separate. What changed when the pressure stopped being abstract and started naming itself. The digging, the confirmations, and the moment the story stopped waiting and started moving. We'll pick it up there.